The date for Wrath Classic's final major content patch is now known. All the new gameplay features such as the random dungeon finder, collection logs, the Icecrown dungeons and more will become available on October 10th. The new raid Icecrown Citadel will release shortly afterwards on October 12th globally at 3 PM PDT or 10 PM GMT. This is it, the moment so many of us have been waiting for, a chance to revisit this legendary raid with appropriate levels of gear and see how we do these days. I have been PTRing the raid over the past 2 testing phases, and I've had the chance to see nearly all the content on Heroic 25 difficulty. So today I wanted to go over my experiences in the raid so far, and give you some kind of idea about how ICC 25 Heroic will be in terms of difficulty, and how fast I think players will overcome some of the raid's harder challenges. Also worth a note before we start, I have cleared a bunch of the fights on 25 normal too, just in order to get back to progressing a Heroic boss faster, and they are all substantially easier, with far less health and often missing the mechanics that make the fight much harder in the first place. Still, I reckon some bosses should be prioritized as normal mode week 1, just to get past them, collect some loot and have a good chance at some Shadow Frost shards. On top of that, the testing on the PTR has not had updated gear vendors from Trial of the Grand Crusader, and there's been no raid-wide buff from Hellscream's Warsong or Strength of Rin, so we're very much going into the raid on the PTR with gear that would match what we'll have on live. Coming into Wrath of the Lich King, I thought a pre-nerf Ulduar would overall be the largest challenge we would face until we moved on to the Cataclysm. Having now done ICC 25 Heroic on the PTR though, I can tell you that that is most definitely not the case. This raid is absolutely a step up from Ulduar, and it makes some of the hardest fights over there look mechanically simple. The single biggest reason why ICC is more challenging is a 2-word phrase that raid teams around the world will come to dread: personal responsibility. This raid is absolutely packed with ways that a single player can lead to the downfall of the entire raid, and I have a feeling some of your weaker players mechanically will start to show up on some fights in particular. I mean, even the second boss in the raid, Lady Deathwhisper, has more personal responsibility than, say, Algalon the Observer does. Algalon's a hard fight, don't get me wrong, but the majority of the raid's job is hit the boss and don't stand in the bad stuff. It's your tanks, healers, the Big Bang Soaker and the Star Killer who are really doing the majority of the work. Just on Deathwhisper alone, you need to know which ads you should swap to at which time, CCing and not cleaving down mind control players, and biggest of all, not blowing up the raid by allowing ghosts to reach you in the final phase. There's a lot of threatening things going on, but let's get properly onto talking about the bosses now. At the end of the video, I'll also give some advice on what I think is overall a good way to tackle bosses in the opening weeks, and which ones you should consider on Heroic. Starting off after the gauntlet type intro to the raid is Lord Marigar. As is quite normal with more modern raid design I guess, the first boss in the instance is not supposed to have you progressing for too long at all. This should definitely be a boss you consider attempting on Heroic during the first week. Have people ready to press their health stone during Bone Storm, focus down the bone spikes fast, and this first boss shouldn't prove too much of a challenge. The only real danger is poor kiting on the Bone Storm phase, or people just not moving out of it fast enough. He also drops the infamous Bryn Troll, the Bone Arbiter, and getting one of these will be a great start to the raid for all your two-handed melee users. Finish up the Gatekeeper of the raid, we're on to the second boss. And for the second boss of the instance, Lady Deathwhisper is not a trivial Heroic encounter. In fact, I think there are 3 encounters which come later in the raid that have less demanding mechanics. I would consider trying this boss week 1, but if things start to go south, it could easily eat up quite a bit of your raid night due to the final phase of the fight posing the biggest challenge. Lady Deathwhisper is also one of many control-based encounters. The Berserk timer is not strict at all, but ensuring your raid stays cool and keeps on top of the mechanics will decide whether or not you're victorious. As mentioned earlier, this fight features mind controls that need to be locked down fast. Ads will come in often from each side, which assigned players need to deal with, while other players will need to deal with the boss's mana barrier. The second phase itself is quite chaotic at first. You need to keep on top of the ads, deal with mind controls, and of course, not get hit by the ghosts. The ghosts really will be the thing that wipe you here. You can see them spawn in as a kind of small purple void zone type effect. They will then chase down a player and explode for massive damage in a wide AoE if they reach them. You don't know for sure if you're being targeted, so run away from any ghosts as a priority, gradually wear down the boss, and it should be very doable. Up the elevator through some more trash and we arrive at the gunship encounter. You know what people called this fight back in the day? Loot ship. Even I pugged this on Heroic regularly because of how free it was during original ICC. You always do this fight on Heroic. I'm not even sure how the fight is different on normal if I'm honest. You just kind of jump over, kill the battle mage that's freezing your cannons, and after that just hit stuff. I don't know. At least if we're going to have a gimmick fight, I guess it's a good thing it's not really hard. Collect your free purples from the loot ship and move on towards the doors barring the entry to the Citadel. A single orc will charge out to challenge you, the reanimated Deathbringer Saurfang. This is the first hard fight Icecrown Citadel will pose most raids. I'll put him on a maybe for Heroic Week 1. It is worth a try, both because he drops the 25 Heroic tokens without attempts, and of course one of the most legendary trinkets of all time, Deathbringer's Will. You'll still get it on normal mode of course, but the Heroic one is better. This fight is quite patchwork in nature as you're just full on blasting the boss with very minimal movement, but I wouldn't say it's just a DPS check by any stretch of the imagination. The idea here is to minimize the boss's energy gain via his bar called Blood Power. Each time the bar fills up, he casts a Mark of the Fallen Champion, copying a portion of his damage dealt to that target. If a marked target dies, the boss heals a huge amount and it's more or less an instantaneous wipe. The tricky bit is towards the end when he's enraged and absolutely destroying several people that are marked at the same time. Plan your raid's positioning and cooldowns ahead of time. Hope and pray Saurfang doesn't mark all your mages, and good luck on this one week 1. Defeating Saurfang, you enter into the Citadel proper with the huge spire tailing up towards the Lich King's throne, but you have a lot of work left to do if you want to get there. From here on out, we can access any wing in any order you want, so I'm just going to go through this in the order of least to most difficult in my experience, which means first stop is going to be in the Frostwing, on to saving Valeria Dreamwalker. It's another gimmick fight, so this time it's the healers who have to restore the boss's health to full in order for the encounter to end. Quite the unique idea for the time, I'll give them that. Your DPS and tanks will be contesting ever-growing waves of adds from the 2 giant gates at the side of the room. This fight is really just doing the adds in the right order, helping the other side if you can, and not getting overwhelmed or nuking an add and having it one-shot you before a tank can reach it. After your healers have had enough time flying about collecting their buffs in the Nightmare, it will be time to pop Heroism and top off the boss's health. A fairly simple fight all in all once you understand what all the adds do. I'd recommend this on Heroic Week 1. And also the mini-boss before Valeria drops an Emblem of Frost too. Little extra bonus for you there. After that, we're going to stop in the Frostwing for now and head over to the Plague Wing. Clean up the trash, pray for Precious's ribbon, take a right, and we're going to do Rot Face first. For the 2 abominations in this wing, in my opinion, this is the easier one. It's another one of these do the mechanics right and the boss will fall over kind of deals. The boss will apply a disease to the players. When it's removed, it spawns an ooze. When 2 small oozes combine, you get a big ooze. As further oozes are added to the ooze, it will eventually explode, flinging ooze around the room that you have to dodge. That's a lot of ooze. As the fight progresses, the boss will apply the debuff faster and faster, but even if you lose players early on, the fight is still quite doable. I'd recommend trying this early on Heroic as well. Across the hallway is the next stop, Vestergut. This fight is mechanically simple, but small mistakes can really cost you. There is a DPS check element that players will need to hit before the boss enrages and one-shots the raid as well. The annoying bit on Heroic is Professor Putricide on the balcony lobbing malleable goo at you. If this hits too many DPS, you're not going to make the DPS check, and if it hits too many healers, your tanks are probably going to die. Also, the fight will range between the raid damage being quite high and the tank damage being insanely high, so have cooldowns for the tanks prepared in advance. I'll put this on a maybe to attempt on the opening week for Heroic, as the DPS check may be problematic. Well, we don't have any more non-end of wing bosses left, so we're gonna have to go to the Blood Prince Council now. And this fight surprised me. When you hear about hard fights in this raid, you hear about the ones we haven't talked about yet. Never have I ever heard someone say, wait till you get to Blood Council, it'll be a white fiesta. But honestly, it is. The amount of different things happening at the same time on this fight is crazy, and if the majority of them go even a little bit wrong, you can instantly wipe. This is another one of these control fights. The DPS requirements are just not high at all. You just really have to be aware of what's happening, where you're standing, where you'll need to be standing in 10 seconds from now, and finding openings where you can improve on a personal level. Each of the princes will become empowered throughout the fight. During this time they are damageable, but their signature ability becomes far more deadly. Some will need you to spread, others need you to stack, and so on. And those overlaps between one prince getting empowered to the next can really catch you off guard. If your raid team is stronger on mechanics than just raw DPS, I would give this some attempts, but this one may be better just to get it out of the way on normal, as even having a little bit more health from gearing up will help with surviving those mechanical overlaps. Not gonna lie, I think Blood Queen Lanethel is easier on heroic than Blood Council. It's a DPS check that will also push your healers, but mechanically the fight is simple. The highest threat DPS at the start of a fight will get a buff massively increasing their damage, but as the fight goes on they have to transfer this buff to another player or they'll get permanently mind controlled. Eventually you have most of your DPS with this buff, at which point in time you pop all cooldowns and try to beat the short berserk timer this fight has. If you can manage the buff well enough, it could be worth attempts early on, but if you mess up the buff at all, you're just not going to beat the enrage. What I will say is Blood Queen Lanethel is the first boss you're probably going to progress which has attempts tied to it, and getting some of those attempts in before the reset may not be a bad idea either. Well, we only have 3 bosses left and you can probably guess which order they're going to go in. Third is the Frost Queen Syndragosa. It's very much another do the mechanics fight, but like, no really, you have to do the mechanics in a super strict way or you're probably going to die and take someone else with you. I can already see myself not being the biggest fan of this fight by the end of the tier, due to the fact that you have to stop DPSing all the time to drop stacking debuffs. For casters in particular, you get something called Unchained Magic, making it so every time you cast a spell you get a stacking debuff. At the end of its duration it explodes in AoE, the more stacks you had, the more damage it deals. And you can get this applied back to back, so you really just can't play the game sometimes. Also, as a Frost Dragon, you already know there has to be an air phase, very reminiscent of Sapphiron back from Naxxramas, but Syndragosa's a bit smarter and launches her frost bombs all over the platform, meaning your raid has to adjust to the detonation zone. At 35%, the fight gets much harder as a stacking debuff starts going out on the raid, increasing all magical damage taken. The final phase is a careful management act by your whole raid to not get themselves killed by taking too many stacks and resetting where needed. This one will definitely take some progression and will likely reduce your attempts for the week quite a bit. Definitely one to try when you have more gear. Which means the number 2 spot goes to Professor Putricide. A lot of guilds are gonna have problems here. This fight lives up to its reputation. This encounter has it all: tank positioning, personal responsibility, DPS checks, and so much more. There is just so much going on during this fight, with so many variables of how mechanics can go pull to pull, that you really just have to have everyone understand what's going on personally. You can't truly assign everything in advance, and when these mechanics can easily wipe you, that makes for a very tough encounter. I don't think there's been a fight before in Classic where so many moment-to-moment calls can be made which can significantly help the raid that may not happen 2 pulls in a row, such as whether to sacrifice the Unbound Plague or pass it around, removing the green ooze via Vanish or some other effect, or keeping it and soaking, flowing the ooze with the A-bomb or saving it for later. Then the final phase starts at 35%, where the fight turns into a DPS race, somewhat similar to Saurfang, as if a tank with the debuff dies, the boss is going to heal for a bunch and you may not make the DPS check before the entire room fills with slime. I've already seen multiple guilds approach this fight with entirely different tactics for both the Unbound Plague and the oozes. Not many guilds will clear this week 1. I'd take this on when you have some more gear, because even then, it's not going to be easy. Was there ever any doubt who was going to be the hardest boss in this raid? The Lich King awaits you on his throne atop Icecrown Citadel. This fight takes difficulty in raiding to a whole other level we have not seen yet. Due to just the time we had on the PTR, I didn't get the chance to see this fight on Heroic yet personally, but I'll get there on live eventually and do a follow-up video 2 resets after the raid is out, as per usual. As of doing this video, it's rumored that at least 1 guild has beat this fight to join the PTR. However, everyone is being very mysterious about it, as I'm assuming no one wants to give their comp away to the competitors. Top guilds hiding their tactics. Now this is how it was back in the day. Either way, I'm quite sure the world first will happen in a short space of time following release, as in a matter of hours. And to be honest, I'll take the content being PTR'd and actually working for everyone over a potentially buggy release which extends the world first by a few days. But similar to Liquid or Limit in retail scoring their world first within the first reset, this does not mean the boss is easy. Far from it. How many wipes do you think the top guilds do on the PTR or other servers to get all the tactics down? It's a lot. Back in 2010, the world first Heroic 25 race was won by Finnish guild Paragon. One of their members, Sinti, made a post on their site going over his thoughts on the encounter. He said, "This is definitely the most challenging boss in WoW history, and I've been there among the first to kill horsemen in Nax 40 and whatnot. Everything else up to this point pales in comparison. This encounter is extremely ruthless in the sense that anyone making a mistake will almost instantly lead to a raid-wide wipe. The fight itself requires almost 20 minutes of full-on concentration coupled with a very high personal skill level." Paragon also said Lich King 25 Heroic took them 170 attempts in total. And can I remind you, they ended up killing it with a 5% raid-wide buff and many resets of gearing up in ICC gear. I mean, check out their kill screenshot. Everyone's wearing tier 10. Not to take anything away from them, of course, but we're looking at a very different landscape taking on Arthas this early with the gear we have. So yeah, Lich King is going to be brutal. I think most guilds will need some level of raid-wide buff to get this one down. Even then, it won't be easy. And those are my thoughts on ICC so far. So in short, Heroics to attempt week 1, Lord Marigar, maybe Lady Death Whisper, not too sure on that one, definitely Loot Ship, Rotface, and Valeria Dreamwalker. When you have more gear and are feeling more confident in your raid's ability, you should try out Vestergut, Deathbringer Saurfang, Blood Council, and Blood Queen Lanathel. And the final 3 to progress when you have everything else on farm are Syndragosa, Professor Putricide, and the Lich King. Of course, my traditional raid review to see how many guilds are clearing will happen after the second reset, and I'm very interested to check the stats on this when the time comes. But for now, I just need the raid to come out so I can really get stuck into it. Let me know if you raided ICC back in the day, whether it'll be your first time in here, and what your experiences of this raid are down below. And as always, thank you all so much for watching and listening in, and I'll see you all on the next one very soon.